This one belongs to you? You'll take the other one? Well, this is an original with me, and I copy it really well. Travel is the only thing you buy that makes you richer. Yeah. I don't know where it came from, but I like it. Travel is the only thing you buy that makes you richer. We've had really just a privilege to travel to multiple countries, perhaps up to 35 or so. And I feel a responsibility that, well, yeah, a lot of times we're on vacation, but a lot of times we're on a missions trip, or perhaps we're learning, or as we go about. And so to share with you today about these 7 churches that are in Revelation. Well, first of all, I've read Revelation. We all have, I think. But I didn't know you could really go to these cities. I just thought those are some cities in the Bible and they're important. So we've had the privilege of going there, and we had the privilege um, of inviting a group of pastors a year ago to go with us. And so we just feel accountable and responsible that we can't keep it to ourselves. We want to share with you about these amazing churches that we learned about in Revelation. Also, we still belong to this church. Someone said to me, "Did you join another church?" No, because we love to travel, and 6 of our grandchildren attend a Redeemer Presbyterian church down by the Capitol, and so we take several of our grandchildren with us to church, and so we love being part of their spiritual growth in that capacity. A little bit about where we are, what we've been doing. I was talking to Mr. and Mrs. Rice a little bit ago, and several months ago, well, okay, for about 10 years, I had been wanting to learn to play the accordion, really. And I can play piano, not like Kathy, but, and I can read music. So music is familiar to me. And so I shared with Dennis and our son Adam here, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, that I would like to learn to play the accordion. I didn't know what their response would be, because it's not like a conversation I have ever had with any of my family. And they're like, "Oh yeah, Mom, yeah." So when Dennis and I were coming through Denver here, April, I said I need to get an accordion. I had an accordion. It was one that was working for me, but I felt like I needed to get one with more buttons on it. There you go. And so we Googled as we were coming through Denver, and I said to Dennis, I said, I'd like to just look at accordions. He says, "Okay, we're just going to look." You know where we're going, don't you? So we found this place called is it Monarch Accordion. So we stopped in, and as we walked in, I saw there was like this room, not this big, but this room had like all these trophies around it, and there was this man sitting there practicing. And I'm like, I don't know what we got into. And then he had a whole bunch of accordions there. Well, and as I was telling the Rices, what I found as we visited with him, Mike Amon is his name, and he told us that he is 85 years old. And he shared that he is the youngest of 6 children. 4 of his siblings died of Alzheimer's, and his current living sister is ill with Alzheimer's. He's as sharp as any of us here in this room, I promise you. And he attributes that to music. And the fact that when you keep learning I'm talking to all of us, when we keep learning and we take on new skills and we practice those, he told us that it keeps his brain sharp. So I bought an accordion from him. And I said, do you give lessons? He says, yeah, I do. And he gives them via Skype. So every Monday afternoon at 1 o'clock, I log on with Mike, again, my 85, he might even be 86 by now, I don't know, instructor. And he is teaching me the accordion, and music is just wonderful. It just heals the soul. So I just needed to share that with you, where we've been, what I've been doing here in the last 6 or 7 months. Thanks, y'all.
There are seasons of life, aren't there? I'm Dennis Nun. This is my wife, Patty. I don't remember if Patty introduced us or not. And we love Berean. We love this class. And it's our privilege to be asked to be back and fill in for Toby today. Would somebody remind me what time we're supposed to be done? Okay, 10:15. Perfect. I've got just a handful of slides, but I'm going to flip through them pretty quickly. We spent some considerable amount of time. Can we, how do I get that turned on? Kim? I've got a PowerPoint here for you. Here we go. It's going. And way back, golly, I think I was looking, it's been 6 years ago, I did an 8-week series on church history. We are what I call church history nerds. We love to explore the history of the gospel and our faith. And the more I study church history, the more humbled I am about the shoulders upon which our faith is built. Because there are so many people, some we know their names, some many we don't. But we spent 8 weeks going through church history. And then we actually recorded all those. And they're available if you go to dennisnunn.com. There's a playlist of those 8 lessons. We followed a book called Church History by the Evangelical Training Association. It was written primarily by Dr. Jim Ekman, church history professor, and was the head of Grace University many years ago, and Patty was going to school there. And so let me tell you the story about how our current travel, we're going to be telling you about the trip that we took a year ago in June, and we took a group of pastors over. It wasn't our first trip, but the way this all started was back when COVID hit, and we were all looking for something edifying to watch on television, or, as we're sitting in our homes. We came across this video entitled The Last Apostle, and I would encourage any of you that are interested in church history at all to pull it up. It's on Amazon Prime. It's other places too. They have a Facebook page called The Last Apostle. But The Last Apostle is a 90-minute documentary that features a fellow by the name of Dr. Mark Fairchild, who is a professor of biblical studies and archaeology at Huntington University. He actually just recently retired from that, but he's still very, very active. And he makes the comment, something to this point, that most of the events that are recorded in your Gospels, in your New Testament, took place in the Holy Land. What we would call, when we think of the Holy Land, we typically think of Israel and Jordan. That's where really almost everything in the Gospels took place. But he says everything else in the New Testament really took place in Turkey and Greece, and a little bit in Italy, Malta, some places right there in the Mediterranean. And so one of the things that he has been doing for years is taking trips over to Turkey, and he's discovered multiple Christian sites over there that were unknown, that people had completely forgotten about. And why Turkey and Greece especially? Well, where did Paul go? Paul's missionary journeys took him there. He planted churches, and those 7 churches of Revelation was really the focus of our visit, but we saw lots of other Christian sites. And I'm going to give you just about a 10,000-foot view of 2 weeks that we spent over there. And so what we did was immediately after we watched that 90-minute documentary, we searched on the internet, found a trip that he had scheduled, that he was taking, and we signed up. And of course, with COVID, it was cancel, reschedule, right? And so finally, in the spring of 2022, on the 10th of February, we left. And we left Lincoln on the 10th of February. We got back on the 10th of April. We were gone 60 days. We had 3 trips that ended up being rescheduled back to back to back almost. So we spent the first portion of that was a river cruise in Egypt, then an extension to Jordan. Then we had a 2-week break. Well, our favorite place in the world to go is Israel. We've been there, I've been there 11 times, and we have friends over there. By the way, let me interject this. If you're interested at all in finding out what's really going on over there, go to TVN Israel on your computers, and there's a guy by the name of Pinto. He has updates every day, and it's accurate. I don't know about you, but I don't have a lot of confidence in most of the mainstream news media. But we get our information directly from them and people, friends of ours that are living in Israel.
Mhm.
So, any rate, so we went to Israel for 2 weeks, and we drove around southern Israel for 2 weeks, and then we flew to Turkey for a trip with Dr. Mark Fairchild. While we were in Turkey there, we came back then to northern Israel for 12 days, and then to Greece for another trip that we signed up for, which was a church history tour of Greece. So while we were there in Greece, we were on the island of Hydra, and Patty had a revelation. Why don't you share that?
Okay, well, I had a revelation, I think is what it's called, that I felt that I was being impressed. And I heard in my head, as clearly as I'm hearing my voice, you can't keep this to yourself. And I think that was the Holy Spirit impressing upon me. Okay, you're having a really nice trip. What are you going to do with it? And so then I shared that with Dennis, and then that's where we invited several pastors, and then a pastor's family also. There were 15 of us to go to these sites in 23. And we booked Dr. Fairchild. You have to book him a year out because he's so good, and everyone wants him as a tour guide. And so that's how that came about.
And Dr. Fairchild is just the most humble guy. He really is an amazing individual, become a very, very good friend. One of the things that we learned is that, again, when you're talking about going to these places, especially in this part of the world, again, the footprint of Paul, it's really hard to overemphasize the writings, the missionary, and the miles that guy put on.
Yeah.
His missionary journeys. But this is, and I know you can't read it all from back there, but this talks about the timeline of the different places he spent during his travels. The longest period of time he was ever in one place was in Ephesus for 2.5 years. We'll talk a little bit about Ephesus, Antioch, Jerusalem, Rome, Corinth, Malta. It's interesting, the 5 churches that really were the foundation of our church and our theology today were, and I didn't realize this until this trip, that it was Jerusalem, of course, Antioch, you had Constantinople, you had the Church of Rome, and then you had the Church of Alexandria. And those were the churches that really were the foundation of the worldwide church today. And so what we did is we scheduled this second trip with Dr. Fairchild, June 17th to July 1st last year is when we were gone. And that's Dr. Fairchild to the left of us. We're standing right there at Laodicea. And in the background, you see a little, behind Mark's head, you see a little light. Well, what that is Hierapolis. Some of these places are very, very close. So we're standing in Laodicea. Hierapolis is just across, maybe 10 miles away at the most. And Hierapolis is known for its hot mineral baths. And that white is the mineral deposits coming down the side of the mountain. But anyway, so Patty and I, we took off, and these are every one of these cities that are named on this map are cities that we went to. We started out in Istanbul, and we toured Turkey. And then we went from Turkey over to Philippi. We started up at Philippi and came down and ended up at Athens. So that was kind of the general route of our trip. I love this verse, Galatians 4:4-5. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. Paul lived from 5 to 64 AD. You're really during the same time as Christ, and had no evidence that he ever met Christ, but he certainly, after his Damascus Road experience, he became, the leading, what I call, in fact, I've got a sermon that I do called the Rabbi's Rabbi. Of all the disciples of Christ, he was the one that was literally trained as a rabbi. And if you stop and think about it, the first 30 years of the early church, Christians were basically thought of as a sect of the Jewish faith. And today, of course, it is by far a larger percentage of the population of the globe than the Jewish faith. So during this time, the backdrop was the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, really, the Roman roads, the fact that Paul was a Roman, gave him all kinds of opportunities that other people would not have had. But the Roman Empire, really, and the fact that the Jewish faith and the Jewish people had spread throughout the Roman Empire. Virtually every place he went, his pattern was the same. He'd go to the synagogue. They'd say, "Oh, you're a rabbi. Why don't you preach?" He'd preach, and then he'd share the gospel, and someplace along the line they'd kick him out, and he'd go next door and start a church. And so that was kind of his pattern. And if he was stoned and drugged outside of the city, he'd wake up and take off and do it again. Really, if you think of his life, it was amazing. This is when we were in our church history study. In the third lesson that we covered this, and this gives you a little bit of a timeline. The apostolic fathers, the people that really took the gospel, the 12 disciples and the people that they discipled, really started, at the time of the Pentecost. And then you go to the apostolic fathers, the people that were those 5 churches, the bishops of those 5 churches. And then you get into the apologists. We're going to talk in 2 weeks. We're going to be back. We just came back from a trip where we went to central Turkey to a place called Cappadocia. And if you're not familiar with it, you might Google sometime the Cappadocian Fathers. The Cappadocian Fathers lived during the 300s, and they became the theologians that really defined our faith. They came up with the Nicene Creed. The Cappadocian Fathers are best known for our definition and understanding of the Trinity. And so that's kind of the era that a lot of this covers. So when we flew in, starting now, we're in country, we flew into Istanbul. Istanbul is another example that you see all over this area of the world, and that is typically there were temples to some mystical god, and those temples, after Christianity came on the scene, became churches. And then later on, the Muslims came in and they turned them into mosques. Well, the mosque that's probably most famous there in Istanbul is the Hagia Sophia. And it's really interesting. You walk into it today and it's a mosque. But they have drapes over all the Christian icons and Christian drawings and art and everything else. And it's really an amazing place. But the Turkey, it's interesting. One of the things I love about Turkey is you go to Turkey, the exchange rate. They're not a part of the EU, so they don't use the euro. They have a Turkish lira. The largest Turkish lira currency is 200 lira. Their lira is worth 3 US cents. So that bill, the biggest bill they got, is worth $5.88. Wow. So everything over there, if you go to the typical tourist hotel, you'll pay something that's similar to what you pay here. But if you go to their local grocery store, you can buy a lot of groceries for $20. But anyway, the interesting thing is, and this is an era when Patty and I have taught church history a number of times, but when we have, quite honestly, I have to admit that I didn't Byzantine era really went from about 330 to about 1453. And so for about almost, well, what, 1200 years, you've got an era where the central spot was Constantinople. Why? Because Constantine I is the one that basically produced the Edict of Milan, and the Edict of Milan took Christianity from being a persecuted religion to an accepted religion, and make it the religion of the king of the Roman Empire. That came later. But he basically says, you got to get back all the property you've taken from the Christians. You've got to let them out of the prisons, those kind of things. Of course, a lot of people, there was things that couldn't be, undone. But basically, Constantine I, or what they call Constantine the Great, he moved the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople. So the Hagia Sophia sits here, and if you go, I don't know, maybe half a mile, you'll see the Blue Mosque. Well, the Blue Mosque is where Constantine's palace was at the time of Constantinople becoming the center of the Roman Empire. So the first place we went after being in Istanbul, landing and getting a little tour there and seeing some of the local churches, we went to a place called Iznik. Iznik is very, very close. In fact, literally where Brian Clark and Matt Odom are standing, behind them, you see something sticking out of the water. Just in 2016, a helicopter flying over this lake at Iznik discovered, oh, there's now another church down there, a basilica. And that is the remains of a church that was obviously not in the water at the time. It was out above ground, but after an earthquake, it now has sunk down. This is the church that they determined is where the first Nicene Council was held. And it's literally a very short distance from what would have been Constantine's palace. And so this is where Constantine called for the first evangelical council, ecumenical council of the church.
And what was very cool is one of the families that went with us, the mom was a professor of like Nicene history. Amazing. And we stood there and recited the Nicene Creed. See what I mean? Travel's the only thing that makes you richer in knowledge.
I'll just tell you real quickly, the people that were with us from here at Berean, there was Brian Clark came with us, and Josh Luce, who's now at another church, I can't remember the name of it. You see Adam Odell is just planting a new church here in Lincoln. He's been a part of Redeemer Presbyterian Church. That's Matt Odom, who is the senior pastor there at the Redeemer. There's Josh Luce. Brian's in here someplace. I can't see him. There he is. And then we had this family of 3 teenagers and the mom, who's a professor of early Christian history, and her husband's a chaplain in the Army. And then Ron Cantor and his wife Elena, they are Messianic Jewish friends from Israel. And then this is Richard and Sandy Frieden. They are also Messianic Jews. By the way, if you're not aware of it, there are over 300 Messianic Christian congregations in Israel today. The Holy Spirit is moving in a huge way. And these friends of ours are over there, actually. Richard and Sandy are in Tennessee right now, but we hear from them all the time about what's going on there. But anyway, move on. So there were 7 ecumenical councils, and they really defined our theology as it is today. Anybody can guess which ecumenical council is missing from that list of 7? Well, there's 7 there, but there's really an 8th. Can you guess what it is?
Tell us.
The Jerusalem Council. Really is where they said, okay, it's okay for a Gentile, most of us would qualify, to to become a part of the Christian faith and the church without the Jewish practices. They don't have to be circumcised. They don't have to, eat kosher meat and all these other things that went along with it. And so the Jerusalem Council was really the first ecumenical council. But there are 7 that are typically referred to. This is a piece of art, icon of showing Constantine. And again, at that first council, basically what they did is they put down Arius and his theology. They accepted the Trinity. When we talk in 2 weeks, we'll talk about the Cappadocian Fathers, which really define the Trinity. This is Mark Fairchild, and he actually spent 6 months there studying this site. And one of the things that's typical of most basilicas that you find that are ancient is they'll have bodies buried within the foundation of the church. If you go to, for instance, Wittenberg today, buried in the Church of Wittenberg, Germany, are Luther and Melanchthon. They're both buried right there in the church, and that's not unusual. So anyway, Mark has written a book called The Underwater Basilica of Nicaea, and that basically tells what they found there at that site. The first church that we went to, and which is the first church of the 7 churches of Revelation, is Pergamum. And Pergamum is mentioned in Revelations 1 and 2, and it's a huge, I mean, we could have spent a whole day there, but you can see this huge theater that they have. This is where their temples would have been, and it's one of the 7 churches. The second church that we went to was Thyatira. Now, one of the things that you learn when you go over to see these places is some of them are really well excavated, and there's lots and lots of stuff to see. Others, like Thyatira, is right in the middle of an existing city that's just grown up around it. And so it's difficult to do a lot of archaeological digging when you've got buildings and people who are not Christians. And so this is actually Brian walking down through some of the pillars that they've raised where the Thyatira church would be. Here we have the third church was Sardis. And Sardis is a huge opening. This actually was a gymnasium, but this is the actual church at Sardis. It was a huge dig. Here is the 4th church, and that is the Church of Philadelphia. Now, this again is another one that's in the center of an existing city, and so there's not a lot of things left to see. But when we would go to each of these sites, we read about them. And there's only a couple of churches that got really complimented in the Book of Revelations. But this gives you an idea. Here we were in the Church of Laodicea. This is an amazing. You could spend several days at this one. It is a huge city to start with, and it's been well excavated. This is a theater that, in fact, they were setting up for a concert at that theater the day we were there. So it's still in use. There's another one that's just as big in the same city that is still in ruins. Basically, you can see it, but it's not usable. But what we would find in Laodicea was what does Christ say about Laodicea in Revelation? He kind of condemns them because they're so arrogant. They're wealthy, they're rich, and so one of the things that Laodicea is that they had a huge church that has been uncovered, but in addition, you could locate several house churches that are in that city as well. And so Laodicea had a lot to see, and one of the things Jesus says to John as he writes the book of Revelation is that because you are not hot or cold, I will spew you out of my mouth. Well, one of the things about that is between Hierapolis and Colossae lies Laodicea. Well, Colossae had this beautiful stream running through it, or next to it. It's unexplored. But then Hierapolis had the hot springs. So that's where the hot and cold comes from in that passage. So we did stop at Colossae. There's absolutely nothing to see there. It's a big tell. It's never been excavated, but you see where it is. And there is a current city of Colossae, but it's located further away from the actual site. But on this tell, we know that that's where the church would have been. Anybody know who, and of course, who wrote the letter to the Colossians?
Paul.
Paul. Who planted the Colossian church?
Epaphras.
So it was one of his disciples. So he was writing to that church, but he, as far as we know, was never went there. But he was writing to encourage the church. So I mean, pretty amazing ministry. So this is, and again, you farmers like me would appreciate this. You get up to the top of the tell, Colossae, it's just covered with thistles. I mean, it's a mess. And you'd see occasionally somebody try to bail it, you know. Okay, here's the sixth city, and that's the city of Ephesus. And Ephesus, by far, if you remember back to my first thing, I talked about the longest Paul spent any place was in Ephesus. And there is lots to see. You could spend a week in Ephesus. It's been well excavated. This is the theater in Ephesus. And anybody remember what happened at the theater in Ephesus?
You,
there were people that were like saying, worshiping Artemis or something like that.
Artemis.
Mhm.
Artemis was kind of the local deity, and I don't have pictures in here, but we actually went to the remains of the Temple of Artemis. And of course, in Artemis, then there were the craftsmen, the silversmiths in town made models. They made basically icons of Artemis, and they were started because he had such an impact there, and basically saying to these people, you don't make gods, you know, God is bigger than that. And basically they started a riot. And if you remember, they prevented Paul from entering the theater, but they took some of his followers. That's the picture on the right shows our groups in front of kind of an iconic place. They call it the Library of Ephesus. And it's kind of, whenever you see pictures of Ephesus, that's the building that they show. Well, there's nothing much left of it, but that's basically the idea.
to get an idea of the size of Ephesus, it was basically the New York City of that time era. Was that large, that many people, and to think about Paul walking into that, and how great an appreciation we have, I do, for Paul and his disciples.
Talk about no fear. He was way ahead of his time. Like, one of the things that's interesting about Ephesus is Ephesus, he was there so long, and it's really spread out. It was a huge city, and while it's a huge place to tour, there's lots of it that's still uncovered, not uncovered. But what you'll also see in Ephesus is, I'll show you a couple of the pictures. I think I've got one of, they had the Basilica of St. John. Of course, John ministered there. And actually, Ephesus, yes, Paul came there, but also John came there. And church history or church tradition says that John, the disciple John, came there and spent a significant amount of time in Ephesus, along with Mother Mary. And in fact, the Catholics have a home of Mother Mary clear up on a mountain that they go to see. We didn't see that, but that is the tradition that Mary and John spent out the rest of their life there, along with Mary Magdalene. And so Ephesus was a real center of Christian early history. The other thing that we did, though, that was kind of an amazing opportunity, was there is something called the Cave of Paul and Thecla. Thecla is not mentioned in our Bibles, but if you go to some of the apocryphal writings, Thecla is known as an early martyr in the church. She heard Paul from her window, and she accepted Christ and broke off an engagement and devoted her life. I think of her from the traditional history that I've heard as kind of the first monastic nun. You know, she really, and so this cave, I've seen these pictures in books, never in my life thought I'd be able to actually see it. Well, they don't rarely take people up there, but it's a small cave. It's maybe as long as this room, maybe 12 feet wide, and it was used as a chapel, they believe, in the early days of Paul being there. And that's one of the images that you'll see in lots of books about what did Paul look like, and that's what they kind of base it on. And so, and as you walked outside of this, literally you could look across the hill and see the theater that I showed you a picture of earlier.
Dr. Fairchild has taken numerous groups over to Turkey, and I think he said he's only taken 7 groups up to this cave. We had to climb up a mountain, well, a very large, tall hill to get there. And I said to him, I said, so why did you have our group go there? He says, because this is a group of pastors, and it was so important to him that the pastors see where tradition holds. Paul stayed. Is that so cool? Is that so cool? And it wasn't an easy trek up there, but we made it. And I'm so grateful. I mean, so grateful that we saw that.
We were grateful for orthopedic surgeons too. Patty was 11 weeks after hip replacement, and we kept track, and she walked 50 miles in 2 weeks. And this was some of the hardest, up and down hills, and people were really gracious to help her out.
Yeah.
So, the 7th church was a church of Smyrna. And Smyrna, again, this is in the middle of a huge city, but underground, they have an agora that's underground that you can see, and then above ground, lots of things that they've excavated, and it's mentioned in a couple of other places. So here we're basically moving out of Turkey. We went from Turkey and we flew to Thessaloniki, and Thessaloniki is in the north. It's in what they would call Macedonia. This is the area that Alexander the Great came from. And the first place we went, if you look at this here, you see the river. This is the river where Lydia was baptized. Talks about the fact that when Paul and Silas got there, the first Sunday, there was no synagogue to go to, so they went down by the river. And the first convert in Europe, because this is just across, they consider Turkey in Asia and Greece in Europe. This is the first convert, and they have this beautiful baptismal site. And there's this really nice chapel, amazing artwork, and it showed a map of Paul's journeys there too. So these were some of the churches that we saw: Philippi, Thessaloniki, Berea, Meteora, Corinth, Athens, and Mars Hill. I'll cover those real quickly, but Patty and I had a special opportunity there at Philippi
To renew our vows for our 50th wedding anniversary at the traditional site that is the location where tradition holds that Paul baptized Lydia. And so we had Pastor Clark bless I mean, who else would I want to bless our ceremony?
Okay, so Philippi sits out here, and I don't know, just to give you a little geography, for those of us from Nebraska, we think in miles, not kilometers, just because we want liberty, right? So Philippi to Thessaloniki is about 160 miles. So we flew into Thessaloniki, drove out to Philippi, spent a day out there, came back to Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki, about 70 miles from there, is a place called Berea. Ever heard of the Bereans? Well, this is us in Berea. There's a really nice monument, and this is a statue to Saint Paul. And remember, he had a dream, and somebody in the dream was saying, "Come over here and tell us about the gospel." Well, this is one of the monuments. This is the Jewish synagogue in the ghetto in Berea, and it's on the historical record. And of course, it was really cool that we could have people like Ron Cantor and Richard Frieden. He's in there someplace.
Up
And
in the middle.
what's
Yeah.
that?
He's in the
Oh, yeah,
in the
right
middle.
there. And these Jewish friends of ours to be able to be there And one of the things that was essential for you to have a synagogue is you had to have free-flowing water for the mikvah. And there's a river running just right behind this. If you remember what happened to him, I should back up here a bit. If you remember what happened is the people from Thessaloniki were upset and they followed the 70 miles to Berea, and they basically drove Paul out of town. So people from Berea went with Paul to Athens. We were talking 500 miles. And so they went with him, and then he left Timothy and Silas there. And they continued to encourage his brethren at Berea. And then about 160 miles south of Berea is a place called Metamora. And I thought I had a picture in here of that. Maybe I missed it. Yep, I did. Metamora is this place. They used to have 26 monasteries on these high cliffs, and there was no way to get to them but crawling up the hills and pulling things up with ropes and things like that. Today there's 6. 5 of them are monasteries with men, monks. 1 is a monastery of women, and it is just an amazing sight. But here we went to Corinth. We got down to Athens, and the first day we went out to Corinth. Well, Corinth, one of the things that two things that are amazing at Corinth is you find this in the pavement, and you can't read it here, I'm sure, but if you read Romans 16:23, it says, Gaius, whose hospitality I and the whole church here enjoy, sends his greetings. Erastus, who is the city's director of public works, and our brother Quatus sends you their greetings. Okay, this was discovered in the early 1900s, this inscription, and it says that Erastus, who was the city director, public works, he paid for that part of the street. And up until then, people really, the critics really questioned Erastus. Oh, Paul wouldn't have somebody that high up in the public government. But he was an early convert. Here's the other thing you'll see. This is the bema seat where the judgment would be done publicly, and this is where somebody would be whipped if they were determined by the government there in Corinth that if they were deserving. Paul was brought here, and by the Jews, and basically the guy says, "Get out of here. This is a religious question. I don't have any time for this." And in fact, they whipped the person that brought Paul. This in Athens, we've actually been to this spot 3 times in the last 3 years. We went with Mark on his first trip. We went then this year, and then this year we just got back from here. And this is in Athens. I'm standing on this. Patty's sitting on the steps that go up to what we would call Mars Hill in our Bible. And Mars Hill, if you remember, is where Paul preached the sermon, The Unknown God, to the Stoics and the Epicureans. Now you got to understand, when you go up these steps were there 600 years before Paul, and we're sitting on them. Now when you get up to the top, it's rough. It's really rough. But at the time, they would have filled it with dirt, leveled it off, and had slabs of marble and seating up there at the time Paul was there. But what they do in the Middle East, in this Mediterranean, is I need marble for my house. And so they just scavenge things. And so they repurpose it. And so what you see up there now is very, very rough. But behind me, up the hill, you see the Parthenon. And so that gives you an idea how close there are. Lots of things you can see. Yep. And so one of the things we got to do this last trip that we just got back from is we actually got into Greece. We were there on a Sunday morning in Athens. We had a day where we had nothing on our calendar really. And we found an Anglican church. And we went to this Anglican church, English speaking, and had a chance to worship with people from there in Athens. So anyway, 3 things that I would tell you if you're interested in learning more about any of these things is Dr. Mark Fairchild's website is called ancientbiblicalworld.com. The Last Apostle, again, I'd encourage you if you're interested in church history, and especially Turkey and Greece, but especially Turkey, search for The Last Apostle. And then if you go to DennisNunn.com, the 8 videos that we had of our previous classes will be there, and we'll add this one and the one in 2 weeks too. But I also had over 90 videos that I shot in 2023 when we were there. And those are on my YouTube channel as well. So at any rate, thank you for the opportunity to share. I've got time for one question.
If we finish at 10:15, probably not.
Probably not. Jim, one question.
You might mention that at one time Ephesus had a seaport.
Yes, and where they have the Temple of Diana used to be right at the port, and now it's like 6 miles to the sea. So you get over 2,000 years, you get a lot of, and in an area of the world where they have lots of earthquakes, things shift around, you get a lot of things changing.
We had communion in Miletus.
Yes. In Miletus, yes.
Yeah.
In Miletus is where Paul met with the elders of Ephesus.
And told them goodbye.
Before he told them goodbye.
So thank you all for listening. And again, travel's the only thing you buy that makes you richer. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I leave 2 weeks from Tuesday to go back to Greece on a Footprints of Paul trip. We're going actually to every place you had was not Turkey. We're going to Ephesus and Patmos, but not Turkey, but this ministry that we're going to. I have this insight that he has I had never even thought about that before, but now I'm like, that'd be cool. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm getting old and not so mobile, so I don't know how much longer I'll be able to.
Our theory is travel while you can.
Exactly. That's what I'm doing. But
Thank you.
Really, I'm so glad I'm going to be here in 2 weeks because I don't leave till Tuesday. But I'm really anxious to hear this got me really excited.
It's great. Thank you.
This guy has been sending us videos and things to read and stuff to prepare, but I want to watch that Last Apostle.
Oh, it's good. Yeah.
So that's how I knew some of this stuff because I've been watching these.
Very
things that
good.
he's been sending.
Thank you.
Thank you. You did a great job.
Thank you.